Hi guys, it's ASBYT, and in today's video we have 7 of the best smartphones you can buy, but not quite the list that you're probably expecting. Your usual list like this will probably have the likes of the iPhone 11 Pro, the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus, the Pixel 4 XL, and the OnePlus 7T Pro. But in this video, we're going to look at some of the phones that have gone completely under the radar this year, or have simply just been released alongside other models who have taken, rightly or wrongly, more of the airtime. And the great thing is, the majority of these are very, very affordable. But let's see exactly what those 7 phones are. And the good news is, I'm going to be giving some of them away. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. It's almost like the top smartphone not list, if that makes any sense. Great smartphones this year that haven't made it past the traditional big hitters. I will leave links to all of these smartphones in the video description below. Right, so the first phone in this list is incredibly good value for money. I mean, that pretty much runs across the board, but this one in particular, we're talking $150 US, just over £100, and it is the Cubot X20 Pro. Now from the front, it's got a very similar appearance to the OnePlus 7T, and from the back, looks a bit like the Google Pixel 4 XL. But it's not just a complete copy, it's got some pretty decent specs as well for the price. So we've got a 6.3-inch IPS panel display, 2340 by 1080, and a PPI density of 409. We've got 128 gigabytes of internal storage, which can be expanded using a micro SD. We've got 6 gigabytes of RAM, and it's running Android 9 Pie, and it's basically stock Android. It's got a 4000 mAh battery capacity, which is pretty much up there with most flagship devices currently. It's got a MediaTek Helio P60 SoC, which isn't the best on the market, don't get me wrong, but for the price, it still handles itself pretty well for everyday use. We have a triple camera setup, including a 12 megapixel primary lens, a 20 megapixel secondary lens, and an 8 megapixel third lens. We've also got a 13 megapixel front-facing camera in that water drop notch. It's not gonna give you Google Pixel 4-esque selfies, but if you really don't care about having the best, it'll take your photo, and it's £100 odd. One very impressive feature, especially at this price point, is video capture. We have 4K at 30 frames a second. You're not gonna get full features and great stabilization, for example, but it's 4K at 30. And the actual build quality for the price is really, really good. Metal and glass, there's a lovely weight to it, and it certainly feels a lot more expensive than its price. Next up, we have a firm favorite of mine this year, and this device, without a shadow of a doubt, is one of the finds of the year. This is the Xiaomi Me 9T Pro, also known in other regions as the Redmi K20 Pro, but for that reason, this one is on the list because the Xiaomi Me 9T Pro is basically the global version and actually launched sometime after the K20 Pro, so didn't get a lot of fanfare. But it is the same phone, and it's pretty brilliant. So we've got a 6.39-inch Super AMOLED display, 2340 by 1080, and a PPI density of 403. And in that display is also where our fingerprint sensor is held. It's running Android 9 Pie with MIUI 10 over the top, which is Xiaomi's skin. It's got the Qualcomm Snapdragon 855, which apart from the 855 Plus, which has a slightly better GPU performance, about 15%, the 855 is probably still the best SoC on the market for Android. Maximum of 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of internal storage. There isn't, unfortunately, expandable storage on this device. We again have a 4000 mAh battery capacity with a 27 watt fast charger. Now in terms of camera, we have another triple camera array, a 48 megapixel primary lens with f1.8 aperture, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens with f2.0 aperture, and a 13 megapixel ultra wide angle lens with f2.4 aperture. So we have pretty much the standard camera array for that flagship device. And while it's not the best camera on the market, it's certainly comparable and outperforms its price. Now the Mi 9T Pro is able to give you that full screen display due to the fact that the front facing camera is in a pop-up, and a couple of the phones in this list have a pop-up, and this pop-up houses a 20 megapixel camera with f2.2 aperture. And look at that light as it pops up. That is a head turner. Looking pretty bling there, boy or girl. Now, like with a fair few Xiaomi devices, selfies tend to come up a little bit soft. There's a little bit of beautify mode going on, but on the whole, in good lighting, you can get some really nice looking front-facing shots. Now, in terms of video, we have a maximum of 4K at 60 frames a second. Again, right up there with flagships around right now. So if you want wonderful slow-mo shots, you can film in 60 frames a second 4K and then slow it down in the edit. And speaking of slow-mo, we have 960 frames a second in full HD. Very impressive. Next up, we have a Galaxy device from Samsung, but not one you've probably heard of, certainly in terms of getting a lot of airtime. And that's due to the fact that it is an A-series device, and the most talked about recent A-series device was, of course, the A80, which had the rollable pop-up camera. You also had the much talked about A70, but we have here the A60, still a very good device, and you're going to get it a lot cheaper as well. It's got a 6.3-inch LCD display, 2340 by 1080, and a PPR density of 409. Now, it is LCD and not AMOLED, so we do get slight discoloring around the punch hole cutout and along the bezels, but we do have a very trendy punch hole cutout, and we have a really affordable Samsung Galaxy device. In that punch hole cutout, we have a 16 megapixel lens with f2.0 aperture, video recording 30 frames a second at 1080, and we also have a triple camera setup at the back. 32 megapixel primary lens with f1.7 aperture, an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle lens with f2.2 aperture, so we do have an ultra wide angle lens again here, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing lens with f2.2 aperture, so good for your bokeh or depth shots when you're taking portraits. Max video rear capture is 4K at 30 frames a second. Now, this device is one of the last remaining phones that has a physical, so to speak, fingerprint scanner, not in the display like most of the devices that are being released right now, but again, I don't really see that as that much of a negative. And even though this isn't the fastest sensor I've seen on a Samsung device, it does a decent job. 3500 mAh battery capacity, not the best spec here compared to some of the others on this list, but it does come with 15 watts fast charging. We have max internal storage of 128 gigabytes, and we have a micro SD card slot which can take up to 1 terabyte. The chipset is the Qualcomm Snapdragon 675, so it's not the Snapdragon 800 series. It's not even the 700 series like the 710, for example, which is one of the best sort of upper mid-range SoCs on the market that do pretty much everything but don't get the same limelight as the Snapdragon 855. But this one is close to the likes of the 710. Great for everyday use, great for social media, light gaming, using your phone as most people do. It's just not going to be quite as good for those hardcore gaming sessions. For the everyday person, it's going to run like a dream. Android 9 Pie with Samsung's One UI over the top. Really do like using One UI, but if you are looking for the latest and greatest updates straight from Google as soon as they drop, you're not going to get it with pretty much any Samsung device. Nothing new there. So next up is a smartphone from the brand Realme. They are a subsection of Oppo, a very popular brand globally based in China, and the subsection Realme caters really aggressively to that mid-range area. Phenomenal specs, cheaper price. Now, they have just launched the Realme X2 Pro, very similar to the K20 Pro and Mi 9T Pro, but that's not the phone I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about the phone that came before, because not only is it still a great phone which completely went under the radar, but it's going to be incredibly more affordable now that the X2 Pro has been released. So we have a 6.53-inch AMOLED display, 2340 by 1080, Gorilla Glass 5, and a PPI density of 394. Not the highest PPI density, but the display, while not the best, looks pretty nice. We've got the Qualcomm Snapdragon 710, which, if you remember what I said earlier, this will absolutely breeze many tasks. And I actually used the Mi 9T, not the Pro version, which had a 710 SoC, as my daily driver for about 3 weeks. And in everyday use, it was very, very difficult to tell the difference. We've got a maximum of 8 GB of RAM with 256 GB of internal storage, again, non-expandable on this device. We have a dual camera setup on this device, a 48 megapixel wide f1.7 aperture sensor and a 5 megapixel f2.0 aperture. Max video of 4K at 30 frames a second on the rear. Max slow-mo of 960 frames a second at 720p. And of course, again, to enable the full screen display, we have a motorized pop-up camera, 16 megapixel lens with f2.0 aperture and max video capture 1080p 30 frames a second. And we've got a headphone jack. In-display fingerprint scanner, a 3765 mAh battery capacity with fast charging 20 watts, and they claim about 55% in 30 minutes. Next up, we have a phone from a manufacturer who have been growing in popularity over the last few years. I am of course talking about Oneplus, but not the flagship. We know for a fact, as I've already mentioned, they dropped the OnePlus 7T Pro, but they also dropped the standard 7T. I think it's the better phone option this year. You certainly get more than what the price suggests. With its beautiful Samsung AMOLED display, which is a brand new E3 panel material display which provides 40% less blue light and 1000 nits peak brightness, it's pretty tasty indeed. And one of the biggest selling features is the fact that it has a 90 Hz refresh rate. Again, when you consider the price, there isn't really many that offer this higher refresh rate in that bracket. We've got the absolute latest and greatest from Qualcomm, the Snapdragon 855 Plus. As with a lot of these phones on the list, we have a triple camera setup. Not a massive fan of the aesthetics of the camera setup, but we've got some really useful features in there. A 48 megapixel primary lens with f1.6 aperture, a 12 megapixel telephoto lens with f2.2 aperture, and a 16 megapixel ultra wide angle lens, again with f2.2 aperture. Max video recording 4K at 60 frames a second and 1080p at 30 on the front facing camera, which is in that water drop notch, housing a 16 megapixel lens with f2.0 aperture. Some great features within the camera. On the whole, the hardware, while not industry leading, it is pretty substantial, and software wise, we've got the likes of macro mode, we've got the likes of Nightscape 2.0, which is really impressive night photography, which you can now use also in conjunction with the wide angle lens. And in terms of battery, it's not the highest at 3800 mAh, but we do have Warp Charge 30T, which alongside technologies from the likes of Huawei and Oppo is right up there. The everyday person will get a full day's use from around half an hour's charge. And the feel in the hand, considering it's a big phone, because it's narrow, it feels good. I apologise for that. That's all I have to say. And we have stereo speakers on this bad boy as well. And all in all, this is by far one of my favourite devices this year, without a shadow of a doubt. Next up, we have another Chinese brand in the form of Vivo. And again, considering how good the device is, lacks any form of real discussion. The phone we're talking about is the Vivo V15 Pro. Another full screen beauty at 6.39 inches, 2340 by 1080, and it is a Super AMOLED one. We've got an in-display fingerprint scanner, a battery capacity of 3700 mAh, fast charging 18 watts. It's running Android 9 Pie with Vivo's FunTouch 9 over the top, not my personal favourite OS, but you will get used to it, or of course you can download your own launcher like Nova Launcher and make it more of a stock feel. Max 8GB of RAM, 128GB of internal storage and a micro SD card slot which can take up to 256GB of external storage. We've got a headphone jack and we've got the Qualcomm Snapdragon 675 again. Triple camera setup, 48 megapixel primary lens with f1.8 aperture, an 8 megapixel ultra wide with f2.2 aperture, and a depth sensing third lens, 5 megapixels at f2.4 aperture. Max video capture 4K at 30, and on the front we have another pop-up camera, 32 megapixels with f2.0 aperture. Max video recording on the front is 1080p at 30 frames a second. Now weirdly, it isn't Type-C charge, it is micro USB, but still capable of fast charge. And finally is a device which has left me really torn. It was launched a couple of months ago, and because of one reason, it was almost vetoed and dead on arrival. But I don't think it got the credit it deserved. We're of course talking about the Xiaomi Mi A3. Now the Mi A series was an incredibly popular one. The Mi A1, the Mi A2 did really, really well in terms of sales and popularity and word of mouth. The Mi A3, because of its display, didn't have the same legs. Whatever that is. But I think for the price, it might be worth another look. So number one, we've got a battery capacity of 4030 mAh. Good. And that comes with an 18 watts fast charger. It is part of the Android One program, so it's stock Android. Good. We've got the Snapdragon 665, good mid-range SoC, not amazing. For the price, not a deal breaker. We've got max 6GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. It's expandable with micro SD. Good. The headphone jack came back after it being ditched on the A2. Good. It's got an in-display fingerprint scanner, which is pretty quick. Good. It's got a triple camera setup, the likes that you would see on a much more high-end Xiaomi device. 48 megapixel primary lens with f1.8 aperture, an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle lens with f2.2 aperture, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing lens with f2.4 aperture. And you can, for the price, get some really, really solid photos. It's a lot of goods, and it probably sounds like a broken record, but what are the bads? Well, there's one, and that revolves around the display. It is only 720, but it's AMOLED, and when you look at it, it looks pretty good. Certainly, if you're a pixel counter, this is going to be a deal breaker for you, but if you just want a fairly nice looking device that does the majority of things well and good, then this phone is good. Again, especially considering the price. So there you have it. They are my top 7 smartphones pretty much around on the market right now that have gone under the radar over the last few months or haven't quite been given the credit they deserve. Let me know what you think in the comment section below about these 7 devices. Which of these are your favorite, or do you have others of a similar ilk that you think are better? Like I said, all 7 smartphones will be left in the video description below. So if you want more information or indeed want to go and buy them, you can go and do that. Now, before we go, I mentioned at the start that I was going to be giving some of these away, and that is indeed the case. I'm going to be giving away the Vivo V15 Pro, the Xiaomi Me A3, and the Cubot X20 Pro. And all you have to do is simply go over to my Instagram, find the post relating to this video, and simply follow the instructions on that post description. As always, these videos take quite a long time to make, so if you did enjoy it and found it helpful, smash a like, subscribe if you're new and love everything tech. I love you and leave you. I'll see you in the next one. ASBYT, peace out.